Okay, and now we'll move to our second speaker, and that is Dr. Wayne Winston, who is a professor emeritus at Indiana University, which was where I got my doctorate a long time ago. I've had the pleasure of meeting Wayne and having him speak in some of my classes. I teach the Intro to Sport Analytics, and by the way, I don't think I formally introduced myself. My name is Jimmy Dish, and I'm an associate professor of sport management here at Rice, and was the director of the sport analytics concentration in the sport management department. So Wayne has an incredible background specifically in spreadsheet manipulation. He has instructed for Microsoft, Pfizer, Verizon, a number of other entities. On the sports front, he has been a consultant with the Dallas Mavericks and the New York Knicks. And he's written a number of books, two specifically that were of interest to me: Mathletics, which I used as the course text the first time I taught the intro class, and then recently Analytic Stories, which we've utilized in class as well. So, Wayne, are you with us?
Yeah. Can you see my screen? I shared my screen. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jimmy. And thanks, everybody, for inviting me. And the Mathletics book, a second edition, will be out by Christmas because the book is so out of date. And we do have chapters now on soccer, hockey, and volleyball even. So I think the second edition will be much, much better than the first edition. So again, my name's Wayne Winston. There's my email. I just want to say the year we worked for the Knicks, they won 54 games, the most they've won since the year 2000, and they have won their only playoff series. So I'm glad to see the Knicks are hot and playing Phoenix tonight. Should be a good game. So I'm supposed to give a tutorial on sports betting, and half an hour is like hardly enough time. I talk fast, so here we go. So there was a spreadsheet, I think, available to you if you want it, or you can email me to get it. I made one change since, yes, I made so many changes and bothered John, Kathy, and Sean. But let me see here how I move out minimize the names of people. Okay. So want to start with the basics of just how does most of sports betting work, and we'll get into some math as we go through here. So last night, the Warriors with Curry, who's just been unbelievable, were minus 8.5 points against the Kings. So what does that mean? If you can bet, let's say $10, and if the Warriors win by 9 or more, you win the bet on the Warriors. If you bet on the Kings and they lose by 8 or less, you win the bet on the Kings for $10. But when you lose 11. So if you think about this, if Vegas can line up half the people betting on the Warriors and half the people betting on the Kings, they don't really care. I mean, they'll pay half the people who wins that game or against the spread. Half the people would win $10, half the people lose 11, and Vegas laughs all the way to the bank. So what is the house edge in that? Well, approximately, there's half a chance you usually win these bets half the time. Half the time you would win $10, half the time you would lose 11, and then the average bet, I guess, is like 10.5. So you'd lose half $1 and 10.5, which is 1/21. So the house edge is about 5%. And Ed said this morning he picks 52.7% against the spread on all games. Now, I'm sure in a subset of games he does much better, but that's proprietary, I'm sure, to anybody who makes their money in sports gambling. I mean, we'll see later, Vegas is really, really good. If you had to bet every game, you're probably never going to beat Vegas on major sports. Soccer, I think, has potential to be beaten, and we'll get into that later. And cricket is probably the most bet sport on the world, but I don't understand cricket. All I know is it led to baseball. So if you can beat if you can win 52.4% of your bets, you can make money. Also, there's a totals bet, which means the total points in the game, and you can bet either side of that, win 10, lose 11. Last night it was 232.5, and I think the score was 230 points. And I think Warriors won by 4, so the Kings bettors won that. But you could bet on who wins the game. You can bet on anything. Okay. And during the game, you can bet, which is interesting on how they come up with those probabilities during the game. I live in Indiana where betting is legal and the odds change just about every instant. Okay. Thankfully, I don't bet that much. So Golden State, the money line, very important. minus 335. Minus means you're the favorite. So that means if you bet on Golden State to win last night, you would have had to put down $335 to win 100, because they were a pretty good favorite to win that game. And we'll talk about the relationship between the point spread and the money line in a minute, and then we'll get into some math. So Sacramento was plus 270, which means you had to bet 100 to win 270 if Sacramento won the game. So that's basically that's the most common things people bet on. Baseball, hockey, we'll get to those, and soccer, we'll get to those in a couple of minutes. But let's go back to the Super Bowl, which first thing I did when I was asked to do this talk was say, we should talk about the Super Bowl. But the way the point spread worked in the Super Bowl was a little bit different, and I'm not positive why. So I really had to start with a simpler example, like the Warriors Kings game. So the Chiefs, as we know, were big favorites in that. 3 points favorites, I think Ed mentioned that. But it wasn't quite 3 points. I'll get to that in a minute. But the money line was minus 171 on the Chiefs. So you had to put up 171 to win 100 from winning the game. And Tampa Bay, you put up 100 to win 145, and Tampa Bay crushed them. I guess I and millions of other people didn't know that Kansas City's offensive line would be a sieve that day. And if we'd known that, I guess the bookies knew that, but I found that out during the game that there was no offensive line that day for Kansas City. They were gone on vacation. So let's look at the money line. That implies a probability that Kansas City would win the game, in my opinion. So let P be the probability Kansas City wins the game. So what probability would be required for you to make money on that bet if you're betting Kansas City? Do expected value. So you'd win 100 with probably P and lose 171 with probably 1 minus P. Do the algebra, and you'd find out if Kansas City's chance of winning is greater than 171 or 271, then basically it's a good bet on Kansas City. So if you're betting Kansas City, you think they have more than a 63% chance of winning. Now let's do the Tampa Bay bet. When is that profitable? Well, if Kansas City loses, probably 1 minus P, you'd win 145. And if Kansas City wins, you would lose 100. So that would imply P is less than 145 over 245 would make it a profitable Tampa Bay bet. That's 59%. So if I average those, maybe I shouldn't precisely average them, but that's a good estimate of what Vegas thinks the chance of Kansas City winning is, which is 61%. Now, can we reconcile that with the probability of winning from the point spread? We won't get exactly the same answer, but usually these are very consistent. But again, Vegas, they've got to be cognizant of how people put their money down, and maybe people have different views on the money line and the spread. But this -3, remember I said it was you win 10, lose 11? They set this up different, at least what I found on the internet. So if you took Kansas City -3, now the game came out as a 3-point game for Kansas City, it's a push, and then nobody would lose any money or win any money, which would, I guess, upset Vegas on the day of the Super Bowl, because that's the biggest betting day. It may be NCAA tournament the first day. I don't know the details. But basically, this -115 here means you'd have to bet 115 on Kansas City to win 100 on this 3-point spread. But on Tampa Bay, you'd have to put up 105 to win 100 on that 3-point spread. So that sort of means they thought Kansas City is going to win by more than 3 because you had to put more down here. Now, the math here is a little complicated. I don't have time. But I think this implies that the bookies thought that Kansas City, the true point spread should have been about 3.37 for Kansas City. I can talk to people about that offline afterwards. But I mean, that would take a little bit more time than we had. But so from the point spread, can we estimate the probability that basically, okay, there we go. Because I see things on my screen. I'm not that big a Zoom person. Okay, also I'm not a PowerPoint person, which is why this is in Excel. I don't know PowerPoint, and I make excuses that it's a bad way to teach, so I don't learn it. But basically Excel, again, I'll be doing the short course on Excel tomorrow if you're interested. But Excel has any statistical table in a stat book or any table in a finance book, it's in Excel. And why people use the tables in finance books or stat books is sort of beyond me, because we've got it in Excel if you know what you're doing. So the normal random variable, there's a function norm.dist, not Jimmy Dish, but norm.dist. So if you put in an X, a mean, a sigma, and the word true, you get the probably a normal is less than or equal to X. And another problem with stat books, everybody has a different Z table. Everybody has a different normal table. So in Excel, it just makes it real standard. So what's the chance Tampa Bay, if you use this 3.37, what's the chance Tampa Bay would cover the spread? Well, we have a formula. I can show that formula using something in Excel. oops, there we go. Okay, so that would say the chance that Tampa Bay, this is the chance from Kansas City standpoint, we put in that mean of 3.37. That's the chance Kansas City will win by 2.5 or less, which I think means they win by 2 or less. So that's a chance Tampa Bay would cover the point spread. Now there is a chance of a push. The chance that Kansas City would win is the chance they would win by 3.5 or more. Oh, we're assuming the deviations about Vegas's pick are normally distributed. We need a standard deviation. That's a pretty good assumption. I mean, I've tested that and many other people have. But the standard deviation is around 13 points. Every year that's true in the NFL. Every sport has its own standard deviation about the point spread. Now, soccer, the normal distribution has no relevance to betting. We have to talk about discrete random variables, as Chris said in his excellent talk. So now, if I would figure out basically what's the probability, according to the spread, that Kansas City would win the game. Since I've got this 3.3 set, oh, this here was basically to figure out why it's 3.37. We really don't need that, I'm sorry. But the chance that Kansas City would beat the spread, we'll do a normal random variable function again. It's 1 minus the chance that, okay, it's the chance they win by 0 or less. Now I should really break up overtime and sit between minus 0.5 and 0.5, take half of that chance of winning in overtime, but that's too complex for a short talk. So this is the chance Kansas City wins by 0 or less with this mean and this sigma. And so 1 minus that's the chance that they don't lose. Winning by 0 or less is losing. And so I get a 60.4% chance Kansas City wins according to the point spread. These two are almost exactly the same. And we'll do the NCAA final game. Boy, I'm glad I didn't bet on Gonzaga. I would have bet my house on Gonzaga, and my house would belong to Baylor or something, or to whoever I bet with. So let's talk about how betting works on soccer. I think Chris or one of the other people who knows more about soccer could correct me, but I think the most common bet, and he alluded to this, was total number of goals in a game. Okay, this keeps you interested. But this, I don't know when I downloaded this, but it was Chelsea versus West Brom. I don't even know. Chelsea is home. And so you can see Chelsea was a really big favorite here. You had to bet 435 to win, to bet on, to win 100 if they won. Now a tie was very unlikely. You had to bet, you bet 100, you would win 575 on a tie. And if you bet on West Brom to win, you could win 1,500 on a bet of 100. And I think Tony mentioned this morning that people like to bet favorites. And I think a lot of times the bookmakers will shade the line up because people want to bet favorites. And so it may not be an unbiased prediction of the outcome of the game, although we'll see later, most of the time, I mean, you can go to a great site, Prediction Tracker, and you can find out that Vegas's picks are unbiased by any statistical test. So now this Leeds Sheffield game, again, Leeds was a fairly big favorite. They were minus 190, and a tie, you bet 100 to win 350. Now, on the total goals bet, these were the odds on total goals in the game. Again, it's pretty rare you're going to see. That should be greater than 5 goals, I think, not 0.5. And that's really unlikely to see greater than 5 goals in that game. I think that's fair. These numbers must not be good. Don't worry about those. Let's just focus on this. Okay, so if you're betting on the most common bet in soccer, okay, they thought more than 2.5 goals would be scored. Now, my model, which I'm going to try and talk about how you build a model like Ed talked about this morning on soccer, because I think a good soccer model could win money. I tested it for about 2 or 3 weeks on paper, and I was making about 5%, but I just have so many things going. I don't have enough time to devote to sports gambling, which is probably my first love to really study it carefully. But so if you bet on this game greater than 2.5 goals, that whoever make the books think that's going to happen more likely than under 2.5, because you got to put up 129 to win 100. Less than 2.5, you got to put up 100 to win 104. So let P be the chance you score greater than 2.5 goals in that game. That happens. So for betting on the over, you need P times 100 minus 1 minus P times 129 greater than 0, which means you need a 56% chance or higher of over 2.5 goals be scored. Now you can come up with, if you have a good model, your own estimate of the chance of that happening. Now, if you want to bet the under, what's the probability of over 2.5 goals be? Well, you need 104 times the chance of under 2.5 goals, 1 minus p, minus 100p greater than 0, and that's 51%, less than 51%. So less than 51%, you win money on the under. Over 56%, you'd win money on the over. But guess what? If the chance of the over winning is 53%, these are both crummy bets. And usually when you do the math, if you have a good model, you'll find out whatever bet they're giving you is a crummy bet. In other words, negative expected value. Now let's talk about that Gonzaga, basically Baylor game. Gonzaga was minus 4.5, although I remember Tony said it should have been a 2-point game. And my best friend from college is Jeff Sagarin, Sagarin.com, one of the best known sports handicappers. And he had it as a 2 or 3-point game. But I was sure it was Gonzaga destiny, Gonzaga's year. And there was the money line and there was the totals. And you could find out, this is just like the Super Bowl example. I'll skip over it because we're going to run short of time. But you should check the math here. The Zaga bet on the money line was good if the chance of Zaga winning was greater than 2/3. The Baylor bet was good if the chance of Zaga winning was less than 175 or 275. Average those two, you get the money line says 64% chance Zaga wins. Now, if you do the normal random variable stuff, the standard deviation is 11 in college basketball. The chance Zaga wins is 66%, 65.8%. That's almost exactly the money line probability. So these two things are fairly consistent. So now Edwards Deming, who was the great quality control guru, wrote the great book Out of the Crisis. And I know the colleague of our Rice statistics professors, the late Professor James Thompson, I read his quality control book. He was a great believer in Edwards Deming's. And he said, in God we trust, all others need data. Great phrase. And so there's a site, thepredictiontracker.com, that all of you should look at if you care about sports betting, because they tabulate how all the computers do and how the lines do. And I guess college and pro football and basketball don't think they do baseball. Baseball, I think, is really fascinating. And I was the one who asked the question this morning about the starting pitcher, because I think that's the hard thing to do in baseball. But there's a guy who won 35% on betting baseballs, give you a link to his paper, and I think it was vetted at the Sloan Conference. But so this is college football, I think the last season that just completed. So Prediction Tracker tells us how things went. Now, Ed talked about root mean square error. That's a bit technical. I'll just take absolute error. I don't want to go back there. But oops, that took me out of what I had. There we go. That took me to the website. But basically, on the that's the average. You take the actual minus the predicted, take the absolute value. And then you average those, and there's a bunch of computers here. I don't know how many we had. I took the top 20 computers. I sorted on absolute error, and basically the line was the best. And we'll see that's the pattern coming up as we go through these things right here. And the bias was, okay, that's the actual minus predicted without absolute value, the average. That's minus 0.33 points for NCAA football in 2020. Now, is that a significant bias? Well, I think a lot of you know statistics. So if the error is normally distributed in college football with an error of about 15, standard deviation is 15, the standard error of something like that is going to be 15 divided by the square root of the number of games. Again, that we're getting more technical here than the other talks, but not horribly technical. So that would be a 0.9 standard deviation. So this thing has a z-score of like minus 1/3. It's not a significant bias. And you could break this down. I think we'll do this in the Excel class tomorrow. Break down the sorry about that. We'll break down the bias in NBA for different levels of the point spread, and we'll see there really isn't that significant a bias. So now let's look at some other data from the prediction tracker. And basically the mean absolute deviation, or the average absolute error, in basically NCAA basketball, NBA, and NFL. And I used a great Excel formula here. I'm very proud of this formula. So this is what's called an array formula, but you need Office 365 to make it work really well. So this formula says, here's the margin. Okay, column F is the margin, and column G is what Vegas is prediction. So this says, for all the data, take the absolute value in each row of the home team actual margin minus the home team's prediction, and average those to see what's the best. Guess what? The line was off 9.14 points in college. So that's college basketball. And there were a lot of games there. The line is better than every computer that was listed. This pattern will persist. Let's look at the NBA. The line average absolute error was better than every computer that was listed. There's my friend Sagarin, he did pretty well. And then if we go to NFL, the line was better than every computer listed. So kudos to Las Vegas. If you want to bet on every game, you're going to have trouble. There we go. So now let's talk about hockey and baseball a little bit. So baseball, I downloaded, I don't know when I downloaded an example here, but this was the White Sox versus the Angels. So there's a money line. We know how that works. So the White Sox were minus 116. They were a bit of a favorite in this game. You had to put 116 down to basically win 100. The Angels, you put 100 down to win 106. But you can bet on the total runs in the game, 8 runs over and under. Now, either way there, you have to put up 110 to win 100. Now, what makes baseball hard, but this I think means you could make some money on it. If you can factor in, I mean, I know how to factor in everything but the starting pitcher. Okay, the park factor, the offense, the defense of the team, stuff like that. But if you can factor in the starting pitcher, okay, oh, I didn't talk about Kelly Gross. Let me just quickly go back. So Kelly Gross, somebody asked about, that tells you what fraction you should bet based on your chance of winning, which as Ed said, you don't really know. But if you think a bet has a 60% chance of winning, Kelly would say put in 13% of your bankroll. Here's the best book on Kelly Growth, The Kelly Capital Growth Investment Criteria by Ed Thorpe. His biography, Man for All Markets, is a fantastic book. And he's the one who invented card counting and blackjack. You probably know, repeat the deal. And so his Man for All Markets he explains card counting in like one paragraph brilliantly. So if you would bet, trying to go back here to the bottom of my screen. Okay, there we go. So they basically, that Vegas thinks there's going to be 8 runs scored there. And then you can bet on runs minus, and this is like hockey too, minus 1.5 plus 1.5. So you can take the White Sox runs minus 1.5, and basically you put up 100 to win 135. So take away 1.5 runs from the White Sox, and if they beat the Angels, you win that bet. Or you can bet on the Angels, add 1.5 runs. Okay, there you have to put up 155 to win 100, even though the Angels are the underdog. Now, there's what distribution governs the runs scored in baseball? The answer is, I think it's really hard to tell. The most popular one is the negative binomial random variable. But surfing the internet last night, found out that doesn't predict shutouts very well. It's really hard to predict the actual distribution of runs. Poisson doesn't do it in baseball. So, I mean, maybe it's a mixture of negative binomials, but if you can come up with a really good way to model the distribution of runs in baseball, I think you could make a lot of money. But the key is putting the starting pitcher in there. Okay, if it's Jared Cole, or basically it's some third-rate pitcher, if you can factor in the effect of the starting pitcher, come up with accurate probabilities for baseball, you can win a lot of money. Now, this guy won 3rd place at the Sloan Conference in 2015, and he's documented thing. I don't have the website with me, but you can Google it. Basically, he made a 35% profit betting baseball. I truly believe NFL at betting every game, I think it's hard to beat. Anybody who watches the NFL can probably come up with reasonable point spreads. We just can internalize the NFL. Okay, now hockey. So this was a Dallas Bruins game. I just downloaded this. The Bruins were big favorites. You'd have to put up 175 to win 100. And they have overtime, and I think they usually don't have ties. They've changed the overtime rules, and I'm not a big hockey fan, to be honest. I used to be. But if you bet 100 on Dallas, you'd win 155. And then you've got the plus 1.5 goals and the minus 1.5 goals bets, and the over 5.5 goals, under 5.5 goals. Now, when I was in grad school, just a quick story, Jeff and I were betting a lot, and I was going to quit my doctoral program. So we bet on hockey, and we were doing really well till in 1 week we lost 5 games on empty net goals. See, the team is down by 1, and basically they pull the goalie, they can lose by 2. We lost 5 games like that betting $100 each game in grad school when I was 25. So now I graduated and I've been a professor and written books. But if we won those games, that probably would have never happened. So let's talk, running out of time almost, but we don't have that much left to do. I hope I can get to my soccer model, but we'll see. So props bets. So that was mentioned, and I think those, if you do the research, are easier to beat. I mean, but there's just a lot of data crunching that basically needs to go on. That big data site, I looked at that over lunch, and I didn't know about that, but as Ed pointed out, that's a great site. You have to pay a little bit for the data. But April 1st, 2021, Tobias Harris of the 76ers, and is Daryl Morey a traitor for going to the 76ers and leaving the Rockets? The people in Houston can answer that question for me. Okay, but it was unsustainable for him to stay with the Rockets, I think, because of the owner, to be honest. Okay, but here's what the props bets were on Tobias Harris, and we can see easily how they came up with these. So 21.5 points over. They thought that he'd go a little bit over, so you had to pay 118 to bet on the over. Under, you could pay 100 to win 104. Rebounds, they thought that he'd go a little bit over 7.5. Assists, they thought he'd go under 4.5. 3-pointers made. What I'd love to see Curry's line there. Okay, I bet that's getting a lot of betting action. Okay, and they thought he would go over 1.5 3-pointers because of the minus there. So I just looked up from basketballreference.com. I looked up the last 10 games that he played. How many points did he average before April 1st? 21.8. Now you can adjust for who they're playing. Cleveland's pretty bad, I guess. And I looked up the rebounds, 7.6. Wow. I looked up the assists, 4.5. I looked up the 3-pointers, 1.1. That's basically where the props bet came from. Now it's a little more complicated than that. And there's so many props bets, like in the Super Bowl yards passing. But those of you who are good at data science, I think you can build good models on props betting. And I was told by a doctoral guy who worked for the Freakonomics guy, Levitt at University of Chicago, who was his GA, that basically props bets on FanDuel and DraftKings were really easy to beat. Now, he was a smart guy, but he said it was no problem. I don't know that. But I did some data fitting. I downloaded every game that Tobias Harris played and did a fit of random variables. And I found that his rebounds were negative binomial and his assists were binomial with a N of 23 and a P of 0.16. So I could figure out exactly probabilities on any of these props bets if I've got a good random variable and adjust for the defense. I think you could do well with that. So I think I've got, about 5 minutes left. So let me I probably can't do the Premier League model. That would just take too long. So let me do an easy NFL rating system to set point spreads. And it did really well in 2019. It was the third best on Prediction Tracker after I evaluated compared to all the other 60 computer systems. So exponential smoothing is pretty well known to anybody who does data analysis. I think I saw it in 6th grade in the Street and Smith yearbook. It was called StatQ. So let me give you a simple way to create NFL ratings. So let's suppose you have to have starting ratings. I'll get to that in a moment. But this game I think actually happened last year. Kansas City was favored over Oakland by 10. So let's suppose Kansas City was 10 points better than average in your system. Oakland was 3 points better than average in your system. So Kansas City was 7 points better than Oakland. But the games at Kansas City, you put a home edge of 3 in, they're favored by 10. Now, Oakland won that game by 20, let's say. I think that's close. So how do you update the ratings? Exponential smoothing is so simple. What did Oakland do that game? They beat the prediction by 30 points. So you need a rate of change. And this is what you have to look up for every sport. So for pro football, I think it's about 0.08 did the best. So you take, Oakland did 30 points better than predicted. You take 8% of that deviation, that's 2.4 points. So you would knock Kansas City down by that and Oakland up by that. And after that game, you would say Kansas City's a plus 7.6 and Oakland's a 5.4. Now, the question is, how do you get starting ratings? Because if your starting ratings are bad, this is worthless. But what you use is Vegas comes up with win totals preseason. In other words, I looked it up for the Ravens. Vegas's best bet for next year is they'll win 11 games. So if you have the over-under Vegas predictions for win totals, and they're very good, they're unbiased, you can play out with the norm dysfunction, the team schedule, and you can solve for the point ratings to start the season that Vegas has. In other words, total wins in the schedule imply a starting point rating for each team. And you use this 0.8 basically rate of change. You don't even look at anything. It's totally mechanical. Maybe early in the season, you should use a higher alpha rate of change. I do not know. But basically, that system, it seems stupid to me every week, but it doesn't get fooled by the noise. As Deming said in his funnel experiment, we get fooled by noise all the time. Now, just one quick thing and I'll stop. I have here a simulation of how you can take point ratings and simulate the NFL playoffs. So if you want to simulate sporting events, the way you do it, RAND is a number between 0 and 1. And then basically norm inverse of RAND with a mean and a sigma will play out the game. Then you just use Excel to play out. This is the year Kansas City played San Francisco in the Super Bowl. And then you play it out 1,000 times. Don't have time to show how that worked. But I had Baltimore as the best team going in, or my friend Sagarin did. They had a 32% chance to win the Super Bowl. But we did have San Francisco to make it to the Super Bowl. And we did have Kansas City as the second best team. But I'm out of time. So I didn't have time to go through this soccer thing, which is very involved. To be honest, it might take a half hour by itself. But it was setting up ratings for soccer based on scores of games and a multiplicative offense and defense system. I could model the scores as on. But I'm done because I'm over.
All right, Wayne, thank you very much. Let's see if we got for questions here. All right. How well calibrated is the normal distribution for getting likelihoods of winning or covering exotic over-unders from the point spread?
I guess it's pretty, I mean, exotic, I'm not sure what that means, but it's pretty, you can get pretty good probabilities using the normal. Football's a little, it's surprising football's normal because the scores come usually in 3 points and 7 points. But with the 2-point conversion now, that's changed things and I think it made it fit better. I mean, is an exotic mean deviating a lot, like 30 points from the spread? I don't know. I haven't really studied that. I just know the money line and the point spread are very consistent, and that's what I tried to show. So, I mean, again, you have to look at the data. There's an infinite number of questions about sports and gambling, but I don't know really the answer to that. I'm sorry, because I'm not sure what they mean by it. If you mean teasers and parlays, I think it works fine.
All right, I think we have one more coming in here,
Okay.
if I can get to it, and we have time for that. I see the home X, home EX, I'm not familiar with that. I'm not a soccer.
That, you mean my soccer thing?
Yeah.
That's expected goals. That's in other words, every shot has a chance of going in. So I think you're better off rating soccer teams because, as Chris said, there's a lot of luck. Rating them based. See, here's a game, Liverpool Norwich. The game came out 4-1, but when you look at how the shots each team took, the real score was 2.2 to 0.8. And then you can translate that into actual goals and then run a Poisson model. I mean, I would need at least half an hour. I underestimated how long it would take to talk about this. But basically, that's expected goals. In other words, a shot based on where it's taken from, distance and angle, has a chance of going in using logistic regression. And there's a site that many sites collect that. I think you're better off creating. It's like when you want to predict what's going to happen with a pitcher, you don't use ERA. You use defense independent fielding statistics because it's more reliable. So I think expected goals is more reliable than actual goals. Because as Chris said, there's so much luck in soccer.
Yeah, there's just a lot of new things under the sun.
That's for sure. And there'll be newer things every day. Hopefully not match fixing. I think college basketball, it's going to happen if it hasn't happened already. That talk was scary.
Okay. And again, we'll have Wayne on tomorrow for a short course in Excel. If you are a Rice student, that's free for y'all. And if not, do they still have time to register? Yeah. So anyway, all right. So again, thanks, Wayne. And that concludes this session.